psychologists because of our expertise in this area. Now I ask you, what reasonable, intelligent person is going to believe that? 2 weeks after psychiatry says we are ethically opposed to this, and Pentagon says, okay, we're going to use psychologists in preference, are we going to believe that the reason that the Pentagon is going to use psychologists in preference to psychiatrists is because of psychologists' expertise? In that 2 weeks, they found out psychologists are greater experts than psychiatrists? I don't think so. But that's what Kuchar would have the public believe. I, along with many other people, emailed Kuchar about all these, saying that, I'm very concerned about all the information coming forth, that psychologists are involved in what look like unethical, possibly illegal activities. Kuchar wrote me back and said a very condescending, hostile response saying, you don't have the facts, you're being misled by the media, you're all being misled by media reports, it's their consistent position. And what I wondered in seeing Kuchar's response is, how does he know I'm using media? I didn't tell him where my evidence came from. You see, this is like a programmed response they have. This is clearly what they're set up to do. And to this day, at the August convention, which just happened a couple months ago, which Brad will talk more about, Ron Levant got up and said, all your information is from media reports. Well, in fact, my information came mostly from the UN Commission study, okay, UN Commission report, which is not media. But he didn't know that. So my point is this, that the exchange with Kuchar, along with all these other things, shows me no concern for ethics, no concern for truth or evidence. The only motive he had, the only concern he had, was to protect the relationship between the military and organized psychology. That's what they're about, okay? And that's what it showed. At about that time, the Penn's task force names were revealed. And then it became very clear why they didn't want anybody to know who they were, okay? There were 10 members, 9 voting members, okay? Here are the 9 voting members. Dr. Jean Marie Arrigo, Army Colonel Morgan Banks, about the famous SEER guy who used the SEER techniques in Guantanamo, who, by the way, is not an APA member. Now, I have never heard of a task force in the APA where you had a non-APA member on it. But Colonel Morgan Banks was on it, who used the SEER techniques. Scott Shumate, chief psychologist of CIFA, or CIFA Counterintelligence Field Activity. Robert A. Fine, who's a consultant to CIFA, who reports to Shumate. Michael Gellis, head of Naval Criminal Intelligence Service. Army Colonel Larry James, who had been chief psychologist at Guantanamo. Navy Captain Bruce Lefevre, and Dr. Nina Thomas. So of the 9, 6 are directly DoD people. 3 employed in the armed services, the other 3 consultants with a direct line of employment from the Department of Defense. 6 of the 9 had clear conflicts of interest, okay? Now the APA's response to this, there was also Michael Wessels, by the way, and he resigned in protest to the way they were operating. And Jean Maria Arrigo has recently denounced the whole APA, the Penn's task force. How much more time do I have?
4 minutes.
Just a couple minutes? Okay. Okay. So, what's the APA rationalization for having the majority, 2/3 of the voting people, having clear conflicts of interest? What they say is that these are the experts. We chose people for their expertise. Now, I want you to consider that that is the same rationale the Bush administration uses to put Dick Cheney in charge of energy policy. It's the same rationale they used to put Bob Murray in charge of miner safety. You know who Bob Murray is? Bob Murray's in charge of miner safety. He's made millions of dollars owning mines, okay? So unethical organizations always use that when they have conflicts of interest. They put the people in charge who have a vested interest, and then they say, well, these are the experts, as though there are no other experts, okay? And then the APA says, quote, the task force was composed of psychologists from varied backgrounds, including forensic, behavioral, and clinical psychology. 3 of the task force members are active military duty. Several others have consulted to various military agencies. Other members had no ties. The diversity of professional expertise and experience among the task force members enabled them to analyze the issues effectively and make informed recommendations. Note the word diversity. To use the word diversity when you're talking about 6 of the 9 people in the Department of Defense is to mangle the English language. Okay? In addition, I just would mention that where it's normal, routine, for the APA to have a liaison between any task force and the APA itself. In this case, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 so-called liaisons, 8 people sitting in, okay? Many of whom were lobbyists to the Department of Defense for the APA. One of whom, Russ Newman, his wife is a biscuit psychologist, and he took over the Penn's task force and said, your charge is to put out the fires of controversy and to do it as quickly as possible. So they weren't just liaisons, they took over. The APA rationalization, oh, it's always common, routine to have a liaison. Yeah, it's common to have one liaison who sits there and just reports. It's not common to have 8 people who take over the process, okay? All right, I'm gonna, as far as the August convention, I'm gonna leave that to Brad, because that kind of brings us up to date on where we are now. He's gonna talk about that and that process. I do want to mention one more thing. The Senate Select Committee, to give you an illustration of how my view of how the AP operates, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence recently had hearings on coercive interrogation and torture. Alan Keller gave testimony in which he said, these enhanced techniques have done harm, and he urges an investigation. Elisa Massima, Washington Director of Human Rights First, said the Bush administration operates outside U.S. and international law, and abusive interrogations don't work. Steve Kleinman, an interrogator, said a relationship-based model is what should be used. Okay? So these people all gave very eloquent pleas against torture, against abusive techniques. The APA issued a statement which said, basically made 3 points. 1, psychologists are the experts in interrogations. The APA has taken many stands opposing torture. And number 3, this area needs to be researched, so give us money and we will do the research. See, the APA never misses an opportunity to seek funds and influence. There is a shameless self-promotion throughout in the way they operate. No mention, the only ones who didn't mention the horrors of torture. They're the only ones who didn't make an eloquent plea against the use of such techniques. Okay? The whole gist of the APA proposal, the whole thing, was self-promotion. Okay? So my conclusion from all of this, from my involvement in this, what I've seen, is that the APA is a deceitful, manipulative organization. Look at the Penn's task force. Look at the way they try to distort the discussion, calling for names. Look at the way they distort in the news media. It says that they say they oppose torture, but they always leave loopholes that the torture can be used. And also, Jean Maria Arrigo, who denounced the Penn's task force, I want you to know that Gerald Kuchar sent an open letter in which he attacked her personally and said this was about her personal background, okay, her personal background, because her father worked in counterintelligence and that her father committed suicide. Well, number one, of course, this is a clear ad hominem argument. To attack somebody personally has nothing to do with the content of what they say. And number 2, her father is alive and well and living in San Francisco. So that's a lie, okay? But that's the way they operate. That kind of thing is right out of the Karl Rove playbook, as far as I'm concerned. Gerald Kuchar, to me, is nothing more than Karl Rove with a Ph.D. And I'll stop right there.